Hello, my name is Jordan, and welcome to the podcast Exiled. We're focusing on helping Ukrainian refugees, or what we call exiles. What we're focusing on right now is getting art therapy to children. And the way we're going to do that is, one of the ways is a Kickstarter to raise money for a graphic novel, and 100% of the profits would go for this purpose, helping the refugees. And so until we get our host, I'm just recording it myself, and this episode about what would go in an art therapy training manual. In other words, what would I want an art therapist to, whether they're trained or not, from another place, what would I want them to include? So I'm just going to be reading excerpts from the manual, and I may be fixing some typos as we go. And I have my cup of tea here, and I think it's good to have, when you're doing a recording or when you're talking with somebody, if you have a kind of rajasic or excited energy, it might be good to have some kind of object like a mug of tea to get you to slow down. And often I do these very quickly. The last episode, I think it was like 5 minutes, but it could have been much longer. And also, I think when I get technical, I tend to want to race through it because I'm worried about people getting bored or falling asleep. And yet the technical part is a big part of the training, because we want to make sure that it's not just drawing pictures with kids, but it's actually pointing towards some of the underlying psychological frameworks that are happening. Doesn't mean you're going to literally talk about it, but it's important for me, I believe, for others, that you're imparting or transmitting a sense of what can begin a healing process that could take a very long time for these children. So that's why I talked about the masks. And I'll talk about the masks again this time, but I'm going to talk about some other systems as well that are complementary to that. So, the grand vision here is that people who take the training, as when I market it, I say, you'll be paid to help refugees. But I'm kind of hoping that time will be donated, and that I can get you work, or you, an art therapist who trains with us, through people who are getting divorced or already divorced, or children going through divorce. The concept of dealing with conflict is actually the same at a systematic level, whether the conflict is a war or a couple fighting. It's obviously different in degrees, and the trauma can be greater in a war, but you never know. A particularly sensitive person could be more impacted by a divorce, and someone could be more resilient. So who's to say? But luckily for us, the principles are the same, in my view. So that's kind of the concept. And the reason is, it's just simple math. If we have to pay art therapists to work with millions of children, then we need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. It's just not possible. So I want to talk about this start with this idea from the Greeks called eros and agape. Eros is kind of the active principle. Agape is more the receptive principle. And this related to Taoism and I Ching. Now, if we're in turmoil, the eros energy gets activated, and you enter a kind of repeated entrapment where you're moving between the tamas energy and the rajas. So I'm mixing a lot of different traditions here. And they're just different names for things that are very similar. In Hinduism, tamas is kind of that lethargic, stuck in a rut energy, and rajas is more the active, ambitious, dancing, moving energy. And there are some people who say that you have to go from tamas to rajas to reach sattva, which is the state of peace. But there are others who say that you can go to sattva right from tamas. And the Hindus talk about how you're having two energies at once. These are called gunas. So, if you have rajas or tamas, ideally the second guna will be sattva. I mean, obviously, the best would be sattva, or sattva with a minor amount of tamas and rajas. But that's mainly for people who have achieved very deep states of peace, or they're awakened. More sip of tea, So, tamas is kind of this blue restrictive energy, and rajas is sort of this red expansive energy. And I just picked those colors from the tarot, and it just feels right to me. Also, the old charts of blood would show the red coming out of the heart oxygenated, blue deoxygenated. I'm not sure if that's even true anymore, but you see those charts. So anyway, that's the idea, is that the blue is more about depletion or restriction, the red is more about expansion. And so if we bring that into the art therapy, just as a suggestion, then the children or refugees or exiles can, or even people going through divorce, they can begin to relate to what we've energetically imprinted. And I'm not saying in a woo-woo way, it could just be a verbal way, however we want to look at it, imprinted those colors with these particular principles. So this red Rajas, it's often unpleasant because there's a grasping. Our civilization, particularly America, glorifies this Rajasic energy. We drink coffee. We're trying to get a lot done. We never can sit still. And we might even need medication to get ourselves to sleep. And work and bosses, it's always very rush. Everything's deadlines. And so that creates a lot of stress. But we often embrace this because we're afraid of the tamasic energy, whether you're lazy, or you're bored, or you feel restricted, or you feel uninspired. So there are times where Rajas is wonderful, like an artist who's excited about beginning their work, and then they enter a flow state of sattva, and then they're just creating the artwork. So you can see why Rajas does have a better reputation. But they're both a repeated entrapment. They're both a grasping energy. They're both the eros. And we want to meet that with agave. I'm sorry, I said agave, I mean agape. So the point is that we're looking for positive stimulation. And that's why we move to the Rajas when we can. But when you're in Rajas, it means you want to get, avoid, remove, change, or keep something. And you can be attached to keeping or removing the state that you're in. So if you're in a state of tamas, you can be attached to keeping that state of tamas, that state of restriction, that state of depression, that state of boredom. You might be attached to it in some way. But more often, I think we see is an attachment to Rajas. There's an attachment to keeping that state going. But equally, there's times where we want to remove the tamas and remove the rajas. So that's, anyway, all of that is that kind of tension I'm talking about. And what we're saying is when you see that, you want to move to the agape, right? So if tamas is blue and rajas is red, and you're stuck in an even mixture of that, you're in purple, which isn't really moving you anywhere. I know purple has some positive connotations in spirituality, but I'm just using it as a metaphor here. But if you think about, if we just pretend for a minute that sattva is yellow, right? So then when yellow and red get together, the more yellow it is, the more orangey color, that could be representation of a more peaceful state. And this is just arbitrary. I'm not saying this points to anything in actual reality. It might, I'm just not saying it does. Now, with tamas, if we say tamas is blue, then yellow is sattva, then a green, and the more yellowy the green, the more we're reaching out to that sattva energy. And I know some yellow-green mixtures don't look very good, but there are certain tones, I forgot the names of them, where they're actually quite beautiful. But anyway, it's just an idea. Point is that we're looking to eventually foster a state of non-attachment or unattached. But that's hard to do when someone's going through a trauma of a conflict of any kind. But the more peaceful and present you can be, or at peace with your lack of peace, the less attached you're going to be. And that's what moves us into sattva. And this is related to, sattva is related to what the Greeks called agape, that receptive higher mind. Now, Jungians have interesting take on this. They talk about 4 stages. We start and finish at the static feminine. So static feminine is the womb, that state of unity, and it's also death, where you're returning to the universe. But then, inside the womb, if things are not going right, let's say your parent is under stress, or they're in conflict, or after you're born, you're in a state of conflict, you may start to feel restricted by the static feminine. The stereotypical examples is when the mother is very strict, unpredictable, demanding, depressed, manic, or otherwise appearing to be conditionally loving. In other words, only loving you if you do something. And that's what leads to putting on one of the masks, the power mask, which says, I can fix this. The serenity mask, where you pretend nothing's wrong, and what we call the HAD mask, also called the love mask at times, but all masks are trying to get love. HAD stands for helpless and devoted. And so that's, particularly see this in children where they're just saying to the parent, love me because I can't do this. I need your help, right? So, and then you find a default framework that lasts possibly the rest of your life. So what we want to do with the art therapy is just introduce these concepts in a very light and abstract way. It may not make any sense to the person, especially if they're young. But the idea is we're just bringing these ideas in so that the healing process can be built upon slowly over the course of years. Okay, so, other times you see the terrible twos, right? And that's a dynamic masculine, but some people say that their whole life. You don't have impulse control. You're just rushing around full of anger or desire. And this can happen in combat, conflicts of any kind, and running away from it. And when we say combat, I'm just talking about conflict. And that can be a violent war, or it could be people in a family who appear to withhold love. Or they will only give it to you under conditions. And this gets then translated to your workplace or a military commanding officer where, they're not accepting you unless you perform to their standards. So the result of that is fear and depression and desire and anger. So that's why we would leave the static feminine saying, I'm not getting my needs met, I'll move to dynamic masculine. But then you get older, more mature, you go to the static masculine. And that's like the masculine control that we see in schools, in religion, in workplace, in armies, government. It's a very hierarchical framework. And you do it because you're hoping to get love from that, right? We're hoping to get love because we couldn't get it from the static feminine. And often someone wants to rise in the ranks, go up in status so then you can have the power. And you see that militaries and gangs, in the workplace, legal and governmental systems. It's just that idea that, yes, I'm submissive now, following the rules, but I want to eventually be the one giving the orders. And that's what often drives soldiers to obey commands. They might not have gotten enough love from their mother, or maybe it was conditional love. So they sought out this new loyalty. This isn't to say that everyone in the army had a bad relationship with their mother. I'm just using these as archetypes. But we can look at it in terms of our therapy as kind of the underlying Jungian concepts. So if you're in retirement or you're doing art, you may find the dynamic feminine. That's the third stage. And that's playful and loving. It's receptive. It's similar to agape, and it can invite sattva. So this is a stage that not everybody reaches, especially if they're in stress. I'm going to have another sip of tea. Okay, so in the static feminine, you're accepting maybe ego death or literal death, or you can taste it during meditation. So that's kind of our objective, but it's not about objective. It's not an objective kind of thing. It's more of a receptive thing. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in taking art therapy free training to do art therapy for people in Ukraine as well as possibly other clients in America, you can go to 4e1.org. This is all sponsored by singlecharity.com, and a link to 4e1.org is at the top of singlecharity.com's page currently. And so that's how you get there. And then we'll have a link to a Kickstarter once we get that going. And that's for a graphic novel when all the profits would go towards helping Ukrainian refugees. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.